Oops, I don't want to do that. Okay, so again, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see. And today's presentation is presented in collaboration between two groups, Smart Care Behavioral Health Consultation Services, and we are part of Vista Hill Foundation here in San Diego, and the Autism Society San Diego. So first, who is Smart Care Behavioral Health Consultation Services? I'll introduce myself. I am Shirley Fett. Professionally, I am a family nurse practitioner and a pediatric mental health specialist. I work with the team as a psychiatric consultant, and I will now turn it over to my colleague, Alyssa. She can introduce herself.
Hello, my name's Alyssa Label. I'm the program manager for Smart Care Behavioral Consultation Services. We're a program in San Diego that offers free consultation to families to be able to find behavioral health support and needs within the San Diego community. I am also a member of the Autism Society board, and reason why I'm so interested in the autism world is because I have a younger brother who is on the autism spectrum. So I'm very excited to be working with my partner Shirley here to bring this lecture series to you. Thank you, Shirley.
Thanks, Alyssa. So as Alyssa said, she's part of our community and is on the board of the Autism Society San Diego. I am also a volunteer board member with the Autism Society San Diego. In addition to my professional background as a nurse practitioner and working in mental health, I am very devoted and dedicated to the autism community here in San Diego. I am the mother of two adult sons who are now 28 and 30 years old, both with autism spectrum disorder. They would be considered in today's language level 3. They both have intellectual delay and speech delay. So I've been very involved throughout their entire life, of course, through many, many different services and programs. And having been through this myself and knowing so many other families that struggle, I felt like this would be a good launch point for this series because of all the acronyms and sort of new language we have to learn when someone in our family or someone we're working with has autism spectrum disorder. So today is the alphabet soup of therapies and services. And I particularly liked this graphic because I think it is, we all go, help, what are people talking about sometimes? And it can be quite overwhelming. So I thought we'll just put together commonly used acronyms. By no means is this an exhaustive list of everything you're going to encounter. And I think when you don't know, you just say, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Don't be afraid to say that. And I think on the other side is professionals. And if you're a professional provider here, being mindful that it's easy to get our heads into using a lot of acronyms because it's familiar and that's the language we speak to each other in the professional arena. But being mindful that your clients, the kids, the families, and so on, this is foreign to them. It's like a foreign language. So being mindful of that as you're explaining things and talking about services and therapies. So I liked this. They've actually studied and found out that medical students on average learn 15,000 new terms in 4 years of medical school. So that's a lot. I think ask ourselves, how many terms do autism parents and professionals learn? And I don't have that quantified because they've actually never studied that before. But just to put it in perspective, I do feel a little bit like we're in tandem or parallel perhaps with medical professionals because there's a lot of terms and things that are completely out of the mainstream that we have to learn. So I think it's many, and I think we need to give ourselves a break if we don't know them all right away because it's quite exhaustive to do that. So let's talk about common professionals that we will see interact with. By the way, if you don't have mute on and you're joining us, go ahead and mute yourselves if you're a participant today. Thank you. There's lots of professionals who we will see maybe once, maybe ongoing, maybe for many years in the autism arena that we might not see in any other area of life. Certainly a medical doctor. Everybody knows MD stands for medical doctor. That's a pretty common one. Then we have SLP. You're going to see SLP written on reports, letters used after individuals' names. And who is an SLP? That's a speech and language pathologist. These are people who are typically masters or higher level prepared with expertise in the speech and language domain. So SLP is speech and language pathologist. Another common assessment and term you're going to see are the OTs. And truthfully, when you're talking to school staff or others, they'll say, oh, they need OT. They need an OT evaluation. They don't usually say the full occupational therapy, so it's good to know what OT stands for. That's occupational therapist, very common professional working with autistic individuals. PT is physical therapist, same thing, commonly referred to, they need PT, they need to get some PT. That's what PT stands for. I think unique to the autism arena, the BCBA is a specialist in autism. And what does BCBA stand for? It's a board certified behavior analyst. These are individuals who at a minimum are master's prepared in either psychology, social work, something like that. And then they've gone on to get certified in behavior analysis, which is AKA ABA. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So these are individuals with advanced education who have gone and taken specific coursework and training in how to work with autistic individuals in a behavior analyst type of way. They typically will be supervisors, directors of clinics, this type of thing. Then there's another term you're going to see, which is BI, and that's a behavior interventionist. So these are individuals who typically work one-on-one directly with the individual on the autism spectrum to implement ABA therapy. We're going to talk a little bit about ABA therapy in another slide. And then there's the registered behavior technician. And again, BI, RBT are fairly new terms. When my kids were young and they first started getting some ABA therapy, BCBA, BI, and RBT were not even in existence. So with the explosion in autism, with the demand for these services, professional organizations got together and said, we need to have some sort of structure on who's qualified and who is not to provide this level of service. So that's where these terms have evolved. So behavior interventionist is somebody who's not registered, and a registered behavior tech has just gone on and done a little more schooling. So both of those are individuals who work directly with the child or the adult to provide behavioral services. LCSW, common term, not just in the autism arena, is a licensed clinical social worker. Over the course of time, if you're working with individuals with autism or parent, caregiver, some of your case managers in different service arenas will likely be licensed clinical social workers. So that's an LCSW. That's what the letters after their name means. And then an LMFT is a licensed marriage and family therapist. My colleague Alyssa is an LMFT. Again, advanced practice, master's and higher level education, and they are trained to be therapists, which again is a very common service that we might access in the autism arena. So those are the common professionals. There's certainly more, but these are the main ones. So I tried to break down the acronyms into sort of different domains that we interface with. So the first one I thought we would look at diagnostically is medical diagnoses that we see, talk about in the autism arena. And so these are alphabetical, so they're in no specific order of frequency or hierarchy. I mostly just thought I'd make it clean for you guys so you can see it alphabetically. Many individuals with autism spectrum disorder will have what we call comorbid or other diagnoses in addition to the autism. And a common one that we do see is ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. These diagnoses are typically done by a psychiatrist, sometimes a pediatrician. Some of the pediatricians are pretty good at evaluating and diagnosing this, or it could be a psychologist that could evaluate ADHD. Again, a common, what we call comorbid, co-occurring condition in autism. ASD, I think most of us that are joining today know what ASD stands for. It's autism spectrum disorder. And you may see autism spectrum disorder with ID or with SD or both, with intellectual disability and speech delay. As I mentioned at the beginning, my sons would be ASD level 3 with ID and SD. CAPD is another common co-occurring condition. It's central auditory processing disorder. Those of you familiar with autistic individuals, working with the population, living with them, know that auditory processing can be delayed, can be altered, can be skewed. So central auditory processing disorder can be a co-occurring diagnosis. DSM-5 or V stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. That's a mouthful, right? So psychiatrists and people who diagnose mental health conditions routinely create a manual that lists what symptoms, what characteristics a person has in order to meet criteria for a diagnosis. So this manual is not just for autism, it's also for schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder. It's all of the mental health disorders that are identified. In the DSM-5, there is a category for autism, and it specifically lists characteristics, symptoms, behaviors, observations consistent with an autism diagnosis. And that's what professionals use to clearly and consistently diagnose someone. I think tools like this are really important. And I think some of us can go, well, that's just a manual. It doesn't tell the whole story. Agreed. But clinicians, people need to have some sort of consistent tool that they can go to say, is it or isn't it autism? By no means is it a singular thing, but it's certainly important to have criteria for all the different diagnoses. You don't want somebody diagnosing an individual on a hunch or looks like a duck, so it must be a duck. That's not okay. There needs to be kind of evidence-based factual data, and that's what drives the DSM-5. So if you see that written, hear about people saying, well, the DSM-5, it says this and this and this meets criteria for autism. They're referring to this manual. You can see it online. You can pull up what autism in the DSM-5. You can look at it and see exactly what the criteria people are looking at to diagnose. HFA is a common term. It refers to high functioning autism. I'm going to do a sidebar, personal caveat. I hate this term. It's commonly been used for many, many years as HFA. And, it used to be called Asperger's as well. And so in fairness to people who have kids that were diagnosed, a decade or more ago, HFA was common and used very frequently in all domains. I think that politically and socially, we've moved away from high functioning because I think that implies that someone who doesn't have Asperger's is a low functioning human. And these high and low are somewhat derogatory terms to refer to anybody. Am I a high functioning nurse practitioner or a low functioning nurse practitioner? Am I a high functioning woman or a low functioning woman? So you get what I'm saying about that. So I think that the society and the community at large is moving away from using high functioning autism and more accurately saying maybe autism level 1, no intellectual delay, those kinds of things, which are much more factual and less, I guess, for lack of better terms, judgmental on whether someone has good capacity or capacity. ID, as I mentioned earlier, is intellectual disability. Again, that's IQ testing and criteria, I believe, or intellectual disability, I believe, is an IQ below 70, if I'm not mistaken. Another common co-occurring comorbid diagnosis in the mental health arena is oppositional defiant disorder, described as ODD. You'll see this sometimes kids in particular who have not been accurately assessed, but are having a lot of behavioral challenges, and it hasn't been assessed that maybe they're on the autism spectrum, but because they're so rigid, inflexible, tantruming, having lots of behavioral issues, if they end up in the wrong slot, they sometimes can be labeled ODD, and that can stick with them for a long time. I'm not saying ODD doesn't exist, of course it does, but often kids that are mislabeled, I want to say, with ODD when it's really all more in the umbrella of autism. So I think it takes a skilled clinician to really tease out, is this ASD and ODD, or is this just ASD and we handle it in the ways we need to? Another term that I put on here that you will occasionally still see used and referenced by people, but it's no longer in the DSM-5, they got rid of it. It used to be in the DSM-4, is PDD and PDD-NOS. PDD stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder, not otherwise specified. So these would be individuals that had some of the characteristics of autism, but not all of them to meet criteria for a full diagnosis of autism. They used to call this PDD. So again, there's going to be some clinicians who still label kids PDD, even though it's not technically correct anymore, or people that have, kids that are like my age, that's what their kids were labeled back in the day, and they were called PDD. When the DSM-5 came out, all the mental health gurus that work on this said, look, it's all autism. We don't need to call it PDD. We don't need to call it Asperger's anymore. It's all autism. Different levels of severity of autism, but it's all autism. So they got rid of those labels, diagnoses. SIB is not a diagnosis, but you'll see this written in descriptions of individuals who are engaging in self-injurious behavior. So if you see SIB, what they're referring to on school documents, medical documents are individuals who are hurting themselves, hitting themselves, banging their head on the floor, picking their nails excessively, any number of those sort of perseverative, repetitive behaviors that are causing self-injury. That's what SIB means. And another common diagnosis is sensory processing disorder. And so central auditory processing and sensory processing disorders are often more evaluated in sort of the OT arena, to be honest with you, and maybe neurology and auditory audiologists. So those are sort of different diagnoses, but sensory processing disorder is often an OT collaborating with psychologists type of diagnosis. And you will see kids that have sensory processing disorder, again, co-occurring with their autism. I will say, though, I think most individuals with autism have sensory processing issues. So again, there's probably a larger criteria in the diagnostic arena that labels that as a separate entity. Okay, lots of letters. That's just the medical arena. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to jump on the chat as well. Alyssa's going to try and keep up with everybody's questions or comments there. So thanks, everybody. Okay, so let's talk about different kinds of assessments and terminology in the assessment arena. The first, again, these are alphabetical. So the first thing I put up here is ABC. ABC isn't a standalone assessment. It's a technique used in assessments. And what is ABC? It stands for antecedent behavior consequence. Some psychologists, some BCBAs that work in behavior will evaluate an individual through the lens of, okay, what's the behavior that's problematic? Let's say it's eloping from the classroom, eloping from the car. So let's say elopement. So a skilled clinician who is doing an assessment might use the ABC technique to try and figure out why. Antecedent just means looking at everything that was going on preceding or before the behavior occurred. And that could be 5 minutes before, it could have been 3 hours before, could have been yesterday. I mean, antecedents can be a really long time, you guys. Doesn't necessarily mean what happened immediately. It could be 3 days ago, I didn't get to go to McDonald's. And it's been percolating until it blows up into a behavior. So this is why a skilled clinician really needs to do this, because they're mindful of the scope that an antecedent might take. Then what's the behavior? So observing what is the target behavior or the challenging behavior, and then what's the consequences of that? Not meaning we're penalizing that, but what happens after the behavior occurs? And truthfully, that's an assessment, in all honesty, on how we're behaving. How do we respond? What kind of, do we yell at them? Do we reward it? Do we, what is the consequence currently? So when they actually do an ABC assessment tool, they might look at all of those things and then they'll go, okay, where can we intervene? How do we help? What can we do in the antecedent phase to maybe change that dynamic to minimize the behavior, elopement in our example? And then how do we change the aftermath? You know, do we need to implement a positive behavior support? Do we need to change the dynamic somehow? So ABC is part of assessment, but it can also be part of intervention. The ADOS, Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. It's probably considered the gold standard right now for clinicians for diagnosing autism. It can be used in really young kids all the way up through adults. It requires someone who's gone specifically for ADOS training. Any run-of-the-mill psychiatrist or psychologist, and they aren't run-of-the-mill, believe me, we love them all, but it does require training in order to accurately implement and do an ADOS assessment. A lot of the insurances for services want to see that an ADOS has been done. By no means is it 100%, but I'm just letting you know if they say we need to do an ADOS on your child, this is what they're referring to. It's a very comprehensive evaluation. Another tool that is used is the CARS. It's the Childhood Autism Rating Scale. DEC, your doctors or people may say, we're going to refer you to DEC. DEC is a clinic where assessments are done at Rady's Children's Hospital here in San Diego. DEC is the Developmental Evaluation Clinic. Within DEC, they have lots and lots of professionals who can assess children for all kinds of developmental disabilities, not just autism. So pretty much any child that's showing delays in speech, language development, they will see them. They have a team of professionals that see the child, psychologists, they have OT, they have speech, all those professionals at the DEC clinic. It's not the only place in town where you can get a developmental eval, but it's probably the most comprehensive to get a one-stop shop for this type of thing. So I just put that there because you may hear the term, my child was evaluated at DEC. That's what people are talking about. An FBA is a functional behavior analysis. Within an FBA, they use ABC, okay? So functional behavior analysis is, again, a skilled professional, psychologist, social worker, individual, clinician who is trained in behavior analysis. And functional behavior analysis is just as the name describes. There's a behavior or behaviors that we're trying to figure out what's causing it, why does this person do this, and come up with an assessment for what we can offer or do to try and help modify or change that behavior. Obviously, if it's a good behavior, you don't need an FBA. This is always done in the context of problematic and challenging behaviors. Nobody does an FBA on a child who's sleeping well at night or who is eating all their vegetables. This is kids that are eloping, self-injurious behavior, aggressive towards others, yelling a lot, all kinds of things like that. So that would be where you would see an FBA suggested. Schools can do a functional behavior analysis, by the way, and you can request one of these through an IEP. If there's behaviors being identified, the school psychologist should be able to do an FBA for children in school. The Gilliam Autism Rating Scale is just another one of these tools that professionals may use. You may see that in written notes that they did a GARS on the student, the child, and that's what they're referring to. And then there's a checklist typically filled out by parents or caregivers. It's done in toddlers. Pediatricians will often use this as an initial screening tool for possible autism. It's called the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. And now we're moving up into a little bit older individuals and assessment tools that we might see. I think we all need to be mindful that our kids are going to be adults a lot longer than their children. And all of these assessments and things are super important to have under your belt and understand for intervention and services. But what happens as individuals get older and services may look different and needs change? PCP is going to be something we're all going to be hearing a lot more about. It stands for a person-centered plan. Just as the name describes, the person with autism is at the center of the plan. The focus is on the person. What are their needs? What do they want? If it's someone who's verbal, what is going to improve their quality of life? It's about the person. So it's not about me as the mom. It's not about Alyssa as the sister saying, well, I really, want my son to go to XYZ job 5 days a week, and it's a job they absolutely hate. It's not something they like to do. That's about me. That's not about them anymore, correct? So person-centered planning is going to become an increasingly used tool. There's ways to do person-centered planning. There's people skilled in running a person-centered planning meeting. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the regional center, and regional center is going to be advocating for people having more person-centered planning as part of their service model. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I do have a slide on regional center in a little bit. But PCP will be part of regional center services increasingly. And I think, frankly, schools, particularly when they're transition planning, as individuals are getting ready to either graduate or exit public school services, person-centered planning is really important. What's the life plan? Just like you would do with a typical student. What do you want to do when you grow up, right? I mean, we ask that of typical teens and adults. So that's sort of the gist of a person-centered plan. I put TTAP on here. This is not one that you're probably going to hear a lot of people talk about. I do think it's super important, and I'll tell you why. TTAP stands for the Teach Transition Assessment Profile. It is a vocational assessment to help evaluate individuals on the autism spectrum in what skills they have. And this can be in the fine motor, it can be in task completion, these kinds of things. TEACCH is a long acronym for the program at the University of North Carolina for their autism services. So if you just put in all those capital letters as an acronym, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff. They have had a Center for Autism for decades, probably 40 or 50 years now, and they've developed a lot of really solid programs as well as tools. When my younger son is still pretty much nonverbal, and my older son has limited verbal, but some more. And so we were getting ready to do their transition planning, which should start at age 16 for individuals with IEPs. I said, okay, well, let's do some vocational assessments to see where their skill sets are and so on. And the team of people my sons were in San Diego Unified, so it's a very large district with lots of staff. I said, okay, let's do a evaluation. And the IEP team said, yeah, we need to do this. Came back later, and the person assigned to my son's case said, I've never seen a student like your son. Nobody in my department knows how to assess a nonverbal autistic individual, so we're not going to do it. So I went on a mission personally, and I found out that, oh yes, there are vocational assessment tools for nonverbal autistic people, and this is one of them. And so I went back to them and I said, okay, I want them to have this assessment. This is designed for people like my sons, and it's got reliability and validity, meaning it's already been assessed and evaluated through the gurus at University of North Carolina as being a reliable tool for this purpose. And so I found somebody in San Diego, lucky for me, that actually had gone to the TTAP training in North Carolina. And I said, okay, hire her to come in and do this evaluation. And so I've got to say, it wasn't all for naught. It was actually did glean some information that I did not know that my son was able to do. And it was really useful in developing IEP goals for transition. I'm happy to report, I think they're using the TTAP pretty much all around the district now, because this was like 10 plus years ago, right? My sons were doing this. I've heard that, they've gotten people's trained and they're doing this more, but I only throw this in here partly just so you know about this tool. But the second piece is, don't be afraid to push. And don't be afraid to say, what do you mean? You can't and you won't assess my child. Of course you will. Somebody can do it. There's always going to be somebody who can help you. Okay. So that's my tale of empowerment for all of you. Oh, education loves acronyms. There's a million acronyms in the education arena. So let's just kind of go through, again, I put these in alphabetical order so that it's a little easy to sort through them if you're looking around for them. So let's just start here. APE stands for Adaptive Physical Education. So if a student is in special education and needs services, it needs maybe a higher level of intervention, they could qualify for adaptive PE, which is offered by physical education staff, and they adapt the program. Maybe it's a smaller class, maybe they get one-on-one services, any number of things. That's where the word adaptive comes in. Behavior intervention plan. Again, a behavior intervention plan is the outcome of an FBA, a functional behavioral analysis, right? Remember what I say? Why do people get FBAs done? Because there's a problematic behavior. So you do the assessment, you do the functional analysis, but something needs to be done with that information, right? And what's done with that information is a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, which becomes part of the IEP. That's the plan that's developed based on that data collected from the assessment. So assessments do drive goals and plans. ESD just stands for an extended school day. Sometimes kids will need, extra time at the end of the day or before school services. And so you may see ESD listed on their document. That's what that stands for. ESY, very commonly listed on school documents. It stands for extended school year. Most students in special education qualify for extended school year services, and they can look like a lot of different things. Extended school year could just be summer school, right? Extended school year, truthfully, I got to tell you, when social skills and so on were part of my son's IEPs, I said, I want the school district to send an aide with them to summer camp. And I actually successfully got them to pay for that because they needed a one-on-one aide to go to camp. And the school said, okay, we'll do that. So ESY, be creative and be forthright. So extended school year is just a qualifying document that says, yes, this student qualifies for extended school year, but it doesn't define what that has to look like. FAPE, FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Education. This is a statement that's in the next acronym, which is IDEA. IDEA is a federal law that was passed, I want to say in 1976, called the Individuals with Disability Education Act. IDEA requires all public schools to provide services for all students, regardless of disability. Prior to 1976, there was no mandate for schools to educate any students with learning differences or disabilities. I'm older and I often talk to some of my friends and so on. I said, I don't remember ever going to school with anybody with autism. And this is why, because this was not law when I was young. So it's been a fairly contemporary thing that schools are required to educate all children, including those with disabilities. Within the IDEA is the statement about FAPE, which means, yes, you will educate the child, and yes, you will provide them with a free and appropriate education. And appropriate can mean a lot of services, frankly, for them to be successful, right? So the law is behind us, and that's what those acronyms stand for. Another term you may hear or should know about if you've never heard it is IEE, Independent Education Evaluation. So you're working with a student, you're a parent, you're a caregiver, the team is meeting and they're presenting their various assessments and evaluations to you, and you don't agree with them. You say, I don't agree with the outcome. I think you missed something. I think this is inaccurate. Any number of reasons you can disagree. You legally have the right to say, I want an independent education evaluation. That's what an IEE is. You put it in writing to the school and say, don't sign the IEP, don't sign the document, and say, I disagree with the assessments, I disagree with the goals, whatever, and say, I'm requesting an IEE. The schools are required, public schools, not private, by the way, you guys, public schools are required to pay for, at their expense, not yours, for an IEE. Okay, and that's a useful tool. And you don't just get one and done. It's not like you get one IE the entire time your kid is in school or attending. This could be done throughout the course of time of the many years kids are in school. So an IEE, I just wanted you to be aware of that and what that stands for. IEP is the main document of education for individuals eligible for special education services in the schools. IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. It's the document where all of these assessments are outlined, services are outlined, including how many hours and minutes a day and a week and a year a student gets, and goals are written with objective data that states, this is what we're going to work on, this is where we hope to go. So it's a very, very customized, as the name implies, individualized plan. And all of the assessments, as I said, are part of the IEP planning. ITP is Individualized Transition Plan. Federal law, IDEA, mandates that at age 16, transition planning needs to be included in the IEP. Let me say that again. ITP is the Individualized Transition Plan. IDEA requires by law that all public schools have transition planning as part of the IEP beginning at age 16. It's different than maybe the typical educational goals. Maybe the individualized transition plan is your person has the ability to learn to drive. So maybe the transition plan is in the area of mobility, independence with transportation, independence with community mobility. Transition planning could include things, again, that are outside of the typical academic arena. It could be safely riding public transportation independently. So there's lots of things specific to transition planning. I'm not going to get into details on that today because this isn't a lecture about transition planning, but I do encourage people to think about that. I will make a comment though. I think 16 is a little bit late to be talking about transition planning for kids like ours that have autism and with special needs. I pose to you, if you have a typical neurotypical child that's going through school, when do you think most people start talking to their kids about what do you think you want to do after you graduate? What do you want to do when you grow up? I would challenge all of us to say, I bet that conversation doesn't start at age 16 in most households, right? It starts much younger. And I don't see why. I think it's particularly important that conversation happens earlier for individuals on the autism spectrum, because as we know, sometimes learning new skills takes longer. It requires kind of more repetition. So there's no rule or law that says you can't talk about transition goals and ideas earlier. It's just mandated at 16. And we certainly started this planning at about 14. And I'm not going to lie to you, back then, the IEP team looked at me like I had two heads, like, what are you talking about transition? That was on nobody's radar. But that being said, they embraced it, and we did start having plans about transitioning and what kinds of things we'd like to see them work on towards their adult life. So food for thought on that one. And then the 504 plan, it's not really an acronym, but let's say someone with autism, autistic person is in school and they're academically capable, maybe genius level, they're in the GATE programs, they're in the gifted program, but they still need some supports to be successful. Maybe they need a little bit longer to take a test. Maybe they need to go into a space when they're working on their schoolwork where there's not a whole bunch of other people around. These are accommodations. So that's where a 504 comes in. Maybe they don't need all the other services that an IEP could offer. Like maybe they don't need speech and OT and all these other things, but they do need identified supports for them to be able to learn and be successful. That's where a 504 plan is in place. So there are intermediate services that can be offered for someone who doesn't fully qualify or perhaps even need an IEP. So that's what a 504 is about. And 504 just refers to the section in the law. That's how they got that label for it. Okay. And yes, because as I said earlier, education has lots of acronyms. We have page 2. Again, LRE stands for least restrictive environment. Again, this is part of the IDEA, and the recommendations are the person should get FAPE, a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. So a battle sometimes I hear is parents who want their child, or caregivers with their child, in a gen ed classroom with supports, right? Mainstream, it's called. That would be the least restrictive environment, because that's the environment that all the other students on campus are in. But sometimes school district staff may push back and say, well, we can't make it work in the classroom. They really need to be in a self-contained classroom. And certainly a self-contained classroom is appropriate for some individuals. The law is behind you on least restrictive environment. The law states that the student should be served in the least restrictive environment to be successful. So I just put that on there so you know that that's part of the law, and identifying what environment would be the best for the individual is not necessarily up to the school. It's really what's the best for the individual and the least restrictive. I will say, though, there are individuals on the autism spectrum who are elopers and very aggressive and have a lot of behavioral challenges. And so LRE might be a self-contained classroom with a one-on-one aid, because that's the environment and the services that are going to enable them to be successful throughout their day. NPS stands for non-public school. Pretty straightforward, private schools. NPA is a non-public agency. As an example of a non-public agency, that could be any of these ABA companies that we use. I know when my sons were young, we had our ABA company actually do trainings and provide the one-on-one aids for our sons in school, because the school district didn't have the capacity to do that. So in the IEP, it had NPA services, and it listed the name of the company and how many hours and so on that they were going to do. So that's an example of what an NPA might be. It's just a non-public agency, private company that might be providing services. On the IEP, there's a category that says OHI. For most of us, it might say nothing, but let's say a person has other health impairments. So might be autism with epilepsy. It might be autism with ODD, central auditory processing disorder. So this is the place where they put a primary diagnosis or a primary educational diagnosis, and then they might have OHI as other health impairment. That's what that spot is for, and that's what that means. PECS is Picture Exchange Communication System. It's an acronym for a picture system that helps individuals, primarily nonverbal, be able to communicate. And it's just as the name implies. You can Google PECS. It's been well known, well documented, very commonly used in early intervention, preschools, and it can be used all the way up through high school, frankly, if the person needs it. It's a system where a person either touches, picks a picture, points to a picture to indicate what they need, what they're doing, express themselves. SDA is a special day class. Just again, you might see this on the education documents, that's the placement they're recommending. It would be a class with all special education that's run by a special education teacher. SKIA, really common term in education arena, and it stands for Special Circumstance Instructional Assistance. Wow, that's a long name, right? SKIA, I will say, is AKA, how do you get a one-on-one aid, basically. And the school will say to you, well, we have to do a SKIA assessment. This is what they're referring to. So what they identify is, this is a child that needs additional assistance beyond what's currently being offered in the classroom to be successful and get their free and appropriate education in a least restrictive environment, right? So in order to do that, everybody's saying, hey, they need a one-on-one aid, or they need to be in a 1-to-2 ratio. We need to have extra support. And they say, okay, but we have to do an evaluation for this. And that's what they're talking about. They're doing a SKIA assessment. They've got a checklist. People come in and say, okay, what are the needs? And then they come back to the IEP team. And then in the IEP, they'll say, this person needs a SKIA. So I'm just letting you know that's what that is. And it's typically the most common SKIA is a one-on-one aid for the kid, the student, to be honest with you. That's usually what that means. SELPAs are groupings of schools. Okay, so a SELPA, again, is the Special Education Local Planning Area. Wow, but again, you may see the term SELPA. What SELPA are you in? San Diego Unified School District is the second largest school district in the state of California, second to Los Angeles County Schools. San Diego Unified is a SELPA unto itself because it's so huge. North County has a SELPA, but it's a conglomeration of many school districts, Fallbrook, Vista, Carlsbad, a number of those. And South Bay has a SELPA. Again, multiple school districts together. So there's several SELPAs in San Diego County, and they're grouped according to size, student population, and it's a sort of an overarching special education umbrella to sort of bring all the schools together to try and provide some training to staff and also to provide some consistencies in services across the spectrum of the various schools there are in our district. SPED stands for Special Education. Common acronym. Okay, let's talk about therapies. Some of these are therapies and some of these are therapeutic devices. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So individuals who have language impairment, difficulty expressing themselves, may be using what's called an AAC, which is an augmentative and alternative communication. That could be PECS, by the way. It doesn't have to all be electronic, by the way. So it's a communication system. So if again, you see this on the education documents or see this somewhere saying, oh, do they have an AAC? That just means some system of communication has been developed for this individual so that they are more effectively able to express their needs and wants. Commonly used now are iPads, but there's a whole lot of other really great electronic tools for voice output and typing and this kind of thing. If you think somebody you're working with or your child would benefit from some sort of device or communication support, you request an AAC evaluation from the school. It's beyond traditional speech therapy. Most school districts have speech therapists who have additional training and expertise in all of the different devices and communication systems available. And they will assess the student, your child, and see where they're at academically, cognitively, and motor skill wise to be able to use any number of devices. And then they'll come back to the IEP team and say, hey, I think he took really well to PEX or took really well to the iPad and the Prolo to Go software, whatever is out there. And then they will recommend that for the IEP team. And if it's proved by the IEP team that he needs AAC, the schools will pay for the device, whatever it is. Okay, so AAC, that's what that means. ABA is applied behavior analysis. In 2014, the state of California passed a law that requires all medical insurances to pay for ABA. So don't take no for an answer. If you get no for an answer, regional center will pay for it as a default, but it is a law in the state of California. Within ABA, there's techniques that we use. One's called PRT, pivotal response training, and DTT. These are just techniques, discrete trial training used within the realm of applied behavior analysis. When you get ABA, the child or the student is evaluated. And again, ABA is used all the way through adults, by the way. So I'm not talking about littles only. Some people think, oh, ABA ends at age 6 or 7. Oh no, I have people with adult children that are getting a version of ABA. And so it doesn't look the same by any means as it does in a 3-year-old, but there's techniques and methodology that can be beneficial in certain situations in the adult population. AIT is auditory integration training. It's, again, I would Google these if you're really interested in it, but it is a model of, it's a listening program where there's headphones worn for certain periods of time with predetermined sounds. And the idea behind AIT is that it's sort of reprogramming the auditory processing challenges the person has. AT is assistive technology. So guess what? When you are requesting an AAC, you're going to be working through the assistive technology department at your school to get the tools and the equipment that's being recommended. So assistive technology, that's what it is. It's just the place where the tools live, if you will, at the school or whatever agency you're in. OT is occupational therapy, again, available at school. PT is physical therapy. Again, a service available at school if indicated. And then RDI is another therapy, relationship development intervention. If some folks don't like ABA, didn't work for their child, RDI is an alternative therapy for autistic children and adults. And it focuses more on social interaction, social engagement, and a lot of people like that better. So RDA is another therapy, and it can be covered rarely by insurance, but regional center will pick it up if it's deemed that this is a good service for the child or adult. And then ST is speech therapy. Oh, I've been talking a long time. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alyssa, the LMFT, and she's going to talk about mental health therapies.
Thanks, Shirley. That's a whole lot to cover, so well done. All right, so there are some variety of different mental health therapies that have proven to be very helpful for individuals with autism. Aim High is one you might hear in San Diego. It was actually created in San Diego. And what it is a training program or protocol that was generated with the help of Rady Children's Hospital as well as UCSD. And what they do is they train therapists on how to have put together individualized mental health interventions specifically for individuals with autism. It focuses on addressing challenging behaviors, as well as creating positive alternative skills that they can use instead of the more challenging behaviors. So when you are engaging in therapy with somebody in San Diego, you may want to ask around, if you're calling, Rady's outpatient psychiatry, you might want to ask if any of their staff have been trained in Aim High, and if so, could you be assigned to one of those staff members? It just got started up a couple years ago, so it's not as prevalent as we would like, but I guess at this point, a lot of people are being trained in it, and so hopefully in a couple of years, there'll be many more people that have been trained in this. CBT is a very common therapy that you'll hear quite often. One of the reasons behind it is because it's evidence-based. So anytime there's a mental health therapy that has evidence that supports that this is a useful, effective mode of therapy, insurances like to pay for it. So you'll see those more common. You'll see it recommended by pediatricians, by schools. With CBT, it's one of those tried and true therapies that have been very effective for many different things, including autism. It's a common talk therapy. and it focuses on your thoughts and how they impact your behaviors. So what it will do is identify problematic thinking that leads to problematic behaviors. And what you want to do in CBT is create very specific goals that are oriented into altering those problematic thinking patterns and behavior patterns. Now, something that's very similar to CBT, and a lot of people think it's just like a modified CBT, would be DBT that came around a little bit after. It is also evidence-based and has been proven to be very therapeutic and helpful. It was originally designed to help people with really intense emotional regulation concerns, like with the borderline personality disorder. But what they're finding is it's much more helpful for people with ADHD, as well as autism, as well as severe depression and things like that. So you're seeing it more and more be introduced to different communities. With DBT, the difference between DBT and CBT is there's a much stronger focus on mindfulness and living in the moment. This can be particularly helpful for our friends on the autism spectrum who perhaps perseverate on past events and focus and have a hard time letting go of past events or worries or ideas. So it really focuses on creating skills that will have them live in the moment and not sit in the worries quite so much. It also really focuses on a lot of emotional regulation and generating positive coping skills to help manage that emotional regulation. Their big motto is to create distress tolerance. Now, PCIT is a real fun therapy. I've been trained in CBT, DBT, and PCIT, but I really enjoy PCIT because it focuses on the relationship between the parent and the child. This typically will happen with children who are 6 years old and under. The hallmark to this is it's parent coaching, and it's live parent coaching. So what you'll have is a parent and their child working together, playing together within a room, and then behind a one-way mirror, you will have the therapist that actually has a bug in the ear of the parent and kind of coaches the parent on what to say and what to do. There's 2 different phases of PCIT. The first phase is to really just build the emotional bond between the parent and the child and build trust between the parent and the child, so that in phase 2, you can start addressing the more problematic behaviors. TBS. This is a therapeutic program that's in San Diego. A lot of our kids that are experiencing more aggression or experiencing just more challenging behaviors might have TBS added to their treatment plan. It can go incongruent or congruently with other therapeutic programs that you're involved in. What it is a intense, individualized behavior plan with a one-on-one behavioral coach that would be assigned to the child to work with them. This program is specific to children who are on Medi-Cal, and it's also targeted on children who are a little bit more at risk, like I said, with the aggressive behaviors and whatnot. Typically, a child that would qualify for this program would be at risk of perhaps needing to be placed out of the home, would perhaps be at risk of having to be removed from their school situation, or they could be transitioning down from a higher level of care like hospitalization. TMS is an interesting therapeutic technique. This is transcranial magnetic stimulation. What they do is they put a electromagnetic coil and they put it close to your forehead. And the idea behind it is that it delivers a magnetic pulse, and that magnetic pulse will go into the brain and stimulate nerve cells that they believe affect mood regulation and depression. And there's not as much research behind it as perhaps some of the other therapeutic models, but people are seeing that it does create a difference. Why it creates a difference, they're not quite sure, but it is something that you could look into as adding to your treatment, especially for our individuals on the autism spectrum who are experiencing pretty intense depression and having a really hard time getting out of the depression. It has been shown to be very effective. So that's
fantastic. Thank you. All righty. Thanks, Alyssa. So next is San Diego Regional Center, commonly abbreviated SDRC. I'm going to try and be efficient here. I know we're starting to run a little over time, but I want to make sure we get through all of these. So You may see the term DDS, which stands for the Department of Developmental Services. That's a state agency, and they're sort of the umbrella over all the regional centers. So I put it here because sometimes when you get regional center communications, they'll say the DDS is mandating this, that, and the other thing. Well, that's why, because DDS is the larger, bigger state agency that oversees and regulates regional centers. If you have an individual that is less than 3 years old and is eligible for regional center services, they will be assigned a case manager, typically an LCSW, and together with you and the child and the family, they develop what's called an IFSP, which is the Individual Family Service Plan. It's sort of, what do we need to be doing for this child? What services do we need to access? When the person turns 3 and for the rest of their life, that document's called an IPP, which is the Individual Program Plan. So again, meet every year with a social worker that's assigned to your case through the regional center. These services you don't have to pay for, and you develop goals, desires, needs, service model that isn't being met in any other domain. So if you're already getting ABA paid for by Medi-Cal, regional center is not going to pay for more ABA or other services. So it's services that you are not able to access through any other place, and that's through the IPP. ILS is a service that is available through regional center that you typically don't get anywhere else, and it's often used for adults. It stands for independent living skills. So if you've got an individual who wants to start being able to live in their own apartment, but they don't know how to cook meals or do laundry or budget, that's what the ILS service model will do. SD stands for self-determination. As of July of this year, every single person in San Diego who's a regional center client is eligible for self-determination. So let's say you don't want to do the traditional IPP model. You're like, yeah, what you're offering me isn't a good fit for me or for my child or for who I'm helping. We want to create a customized, different model. You can choose self-determination. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details on SD today. There's lots of webinars out there about it. And maybe at a later time, I could do a whole talk on self-determination, bring some people in that are doing it. But it's fairly new and it is available. So that's what SD stands for. And then SLS, again, is another adult service that you will see. This abbreviation stands for supported living services. So again, someone is an adult and they have on the spectrum and they're like, yeah, I don't want to live with mom and dad, or I don't want to live here. I really want to live in an apartment, or I want to live with a roommate, or whatever the case may be. Regional center funds agencies to do what's called supported living services. People who are significantly impacted in San Diego County are living independently with supported living services. Now, I shouldn't say living on their own with supported living services. Sometimes it's 724. Doesn't mean you can't do it. So I don't want anybody to come away thinking the SLS is just for more or less impacted individuals. It's for everybody. Public benefits. Oh, this is a whole nother animal, but I'm just going to list some things here for you to put on your plate to think about. ABLE accounts. ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience, which became a law, federal law in 2014. Individuals with disabilities, when they're adults, can have no more than $2,000 in their bank account, or they don't qualify for any public benefits. Well, $2,000 in your bank account and the amount of money people get on SSI is not enough for most people to live on. So people advocated for individuals with disability and said, look, we need to have a way for people to at least have a savings account and have some money that they can have that doesn't compromise their public benefits. That's what ABLE accounts are for. Again, this isn't a full talk on ABLE accounts, but they're available. You can talk to your financial institutions and figure out how to set one up. But the purpose of an ABLE account, again, is to allow the individual to have money. I believe you can have up to $15,000 per year put into an ABLE account to a maximum of $100,000, and that won't ding the person's public benefits or services. Okay, so just enough said, but I want you to know that that's out there. DOR is a federal agency. It stands for the Department of Rehabilitation. Again, that can be a service provider as individuals get to be 16 and older on helping them achieve vocational skills. They can support individuals going to college, help with all kinds of things, job coaching, et cetera. So DOR is part of our world. EBT stands for Electronic Benefit Transfer, and I just put in here AKA, we probably all commonly know it as food stamps. EBT is available for individuals on low income. It can be children whose families qualify, but pretty much all adults on SSI qualify for EBT. It's a way for individuals. Again, this doesn't take away from their other public benefits, and it's an added benefit that some of you may not be aware of, particularly for adults, to gain services and money for food. IHSS/NOA. IHSS stands for In-Home Supportive Services. It is a program of the county and state of California that the basic idea of IHSS is we will pay people to care for individuals with needs in their home because the state realizes that's more cost effective than having people move to nursing homes, group homes, institutional settings. IHSS is a service that requires the individual to be on Medi-Cal. Everybody's got to be on Medi-Cal to even apply for IHSS. IHSS will then assign a social worker to you. In the case, they will come out, they will assess the needs. This is not just for disabled children and adults. This can be for elderly people, but it is a low income program. So again, the person has to be on Medi-Cal. Once that assessment is done, they will send you what's called an NOA, which stands for Notice of Action, which says to you, okay, you get 125 hours a month of care. And here's the breakdown. That's what the Notice of Action tells you. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about IHSS right now, but I just want you to know that many, many children and adults on the autism spectrum qualify for IHSS services. The state of California allows parents to be the paid IHSS worker, which is another, or a family member. It doesn't have to be an outside provider. It could be a family member once they qualify. I mentioned Medi-Cal here. It's not really an acronym, but it's California's version of Medicaid. So it's just when you hear people talk about, do you have Medicaid in California? Yeah, we do. It's called Medi-Cal. And then SSI is Supplemental Security Income. This is 100% low income. It's for either adults who have no other means of support and are low income, and they don't have more than $2,000 in their bank account, by the way. So if you've got a kid that's got parents that are donating, thousands of dollars every year to a fund in their name, you need to get that out of there and move it into a special needs trust. Kids should not have, and the adults should not have any assets in their name to qualify for SSI. And then SSDI is just Social Security Disability Income. Most of our children and adults don't qualify. You have to have been gainfully employed for a certain period of time in your life, and then became disabled to qualify for SSDI. So if the person's never worked, they're not going to qualify for SSDI. They're going to go straight into the SSI arena. But if somebody did work for a while and now they're disabled, let's say somebody had autism and they worked for a while and then they just got crippling depression or some other thing happened to them and they were no longer able to work, then they would fall into the SSDI group and apply for disability through that pathway. How does it all fit together? Well, at the center of it all, we all know this is the autistic person, correct? And then you've got all these different domains circling around. And so it is a lot to take into consideration. And I just show this to say, I think it's always important for us to remind ourselves that the autistic person's at the center of it all. I thought this was kind of a tongue-in-cheek, funny way to wrap this up. So can you understand this? My son had an ADOS done at the Rady's Deck Clinic. According to the DSM-5, he was diagnosed ASD level 2 with ID and SD. We will be getting an IEP at the school with OT, ST, APE, and a SKIA assessment. We are starting intake at SDRC and will get his initial IFSP. At age 3, he will be reassessed for an IPP. We are meeting with an ABA supervisor who is a BCBA. Eventually, we will be assigned to a RBP for ABA with DTT and PRT. Not sure if we should be going the RDI route. So I know that's like crazy over the top, right? But in reality, this is kind of what you are going to hear and see people talking about. So I'm always mindful of how many acronyms and letters we throw out there. And hopefully today has helped calm some of that down for you and make you feel a little more empowered and understanding of what's going on in our world. Last thing I want to share with you is we don't have to learn and know everything right away. The key is to methodically address each need and make thoughtful, sound decisions. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, first of all. And I did want to share with you that today obviously was week 1. And next week, we're going to talk about autism in siblings. Then you can see the other lectures coming up over the next few weeks. This will be every Thursday from noon to 1. And again, we thank you so much for joining us. The plan is for this recording to be uploaded on the Autism Society YouTube site. If you are interested in reaching out to Alyssa or myself, here's our phone number and our email address. And as I said, this will be uploaded on the YouTube channel. So again, thanks everyone for joining.